The holographic display flickered to life, casting an eerie blue glow across the cavernous meeting hall of the freelance Galactic Mercenary Consortium. Delegates from 100 different species sat in tiered seating, their varied anatomies a testament to the diversity of the known universe. At the center of the chamber, Grand Coordinator Zextal, a crystalline being whose refracted body caught and scattered light like a living prism, processed the incoming transmission. The message came directly from the Zalaxian Corporate Alliance, a transmission encrypted with layers of quantum security that would have stumped most communication networks. But the consortium was not most networks. Specialized decryption algorithms peeled back the protective layers, revealing a contract that would make even the most hardened mercenary pause. 1 billion standard galactic credits, Zextal announced, his crystalline body pulsing with a deep amber that indicated both excitement and calculation. Placed as a bounty for the complete neutralization of a specific human special operations team. A murmur rippled through the assembled delegates. Contracts were common, but bounties of this magnitude were not. The amount suggested either extreme desperation or a target of unprecedented strategic importance. Seated to the left of Zextal, Cronin of the Valyrian Mercenary Guild leaned forward. Her exoskeleton clicked softly as she adjusted her position, mandibles clicking with intrigue. Neutralization, she asked. Capture or elimination? Zextal's form shifted to a cool blue of contemplation. Complete neutralization. The contract specifics are deliberately vague, which suggests significant discretion is permitted to the executing party. The holographic display shifted, revealing a series of images. A human woman in her mid-40s, Commander Jessica Reyes, stood at the center. Her image was surrounded by tactical readouts, mission logs, and fragmented intelligence reports that seemed to tell an extraordinary story. To the right of Reyes, another figure caught the attention of the mercenary leaders. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, a man whose background seemed to defy traditional military categorization. Former technology engineer, specialized combat strategist, with a record of mission completions that bordered on the impossible. "We've seen human special forces before," growled Groktal, a massive reptilian delegate from the Kraken Mercenary Collective. "They're resourceful, but nothing we cannot handle." A soft, almost melodic laugh emerged from the shadows. Director Lyra Sovax, representing the most elite mercenary network in the Andromeda sector, stepped forward. Her species was known for their near-perfect predictive capabilities, a trait that had made her network incredibly successful. "This team is different," she said, her translucent skin shifting colors as she spoke. "Look closer." The holographic display began to populate with mission reports. Each one told a story of increasing complexity. A diplomatic extraction from a war-torn exoplanet that had been deemed impossible. A technological infiltration of a supposedly impenetrable corporate fortress. A rescue mission that had navigated through 3 different hostile star systems without losing a single team member. The Zalaxian Corporate Alliance wouldn't place such a bounty without cause, Lyra continued. "These aren't typical soldiers. They're something else entirely." Zextal's crystalline form pulsed with a deep crimson, a color indicating profound professional interest. "The contract comes with complete indemnification. Any losses incurred during the mission will be fully compensated. Equipment, personnel, entire mercenary units, all replacement costs covered." The implications were staggering. Such comprehensive insurance was unheard of in the mercenary world. It suggested the Zalaxian Corporate Alliance viewed this human team as an existential threat. Cronin's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of her species' equivalent of nervous calculation. What could a single human team have done to warrant such a response? The holographic display began to scroll through a series of redacted reports. Strategic disruptions, economic interventions, technological breakthroughs that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The human team hadn't just completed missions, they had fundamentally altered the strategic landscape in ways that defied conventional understanding. "This isn't just a mission," Lyra Sovax whispered, her skin now a complex pattern of deep blues and silvery whites. "This is an opportunity to make history." The assembled mercenary leaders looked at one another. Some saw an unprecedented payday. Others saw a potential career-ending challenge. But none could deny the electric sense of possibility that filled the chamber. The impossible contract was now on the table, and everything was about to change. The first wave of mercenaries descended on the human team's last known coordinates with surgical precision. 5 different species, each representing the pinnacle of their respective military traditions, converged from different approach vectors. The Kraken Collective's shock troopers, the Viridian Neural-Linked Assault Squad, the Quantum Mercenary Guild's stealth specialists, the Zorn Adaptive Combat Units, and the Nexus Syndicate's multi-dimensional warfare team. Each group believed they represented the ultimate in galactic combat capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Rakesh Vorn of the Kraken Collective adjusted his neural interface, scanning the desolate research outpost on the edge of the Crimson Nebula. Atmospheric conditions were perfect for a total suppression operation. Minimal civilian presence, limited communication windows, ideal terrain for a precision strike. Target acquisition confirmed, Vorn's communication officer reported. A holographic overlay mapped the facility's internals, highlighting potential human team locations. Multiple heat signatures detected. Probability of primary targets, 87.6%. What they didn't know was that Commander Jessica Reyes had been watching them long before they arrived. Inside a seemingly abandoned research station, Lieutenant Marcus Thompson sat before a complex array of modified communication systems. His fingers danced across holographic interfaces, weaving an intricate technological defense that was more art than science. "They're coming in hot," he said calmly to Reyes. 5 distinct mercenary units. Interesting mix. Reyes nodded, her tactical overlay showing the incoming assault teams with clinical precision. "They're good, but not good enough." The first wave hit the facility's outer perimeter with explosive force. Quantum phase charges destroyed defensive barriers. Neural-linked combat units synchronized their assault, moving with a precision that would have obliterated any standard military installation. But this was not a standard installation. As the mercenary teams moved through the facility, something felt wrong. Communication channels began to degrade. Tactical overlays flickered. Targeting systems developed sudden, inexplicable blind spots. Rakesh Vorn was the first to realize something was fundamentally different about this mission. "Systems compromised," his neural link suddenly announced. But it wasn't his system speaking. The voice was calm, almost conversational. "You might want to reconsider your current trajectory." The communication came from everywhere and nowhere. Not a standard jamming technique, something more fundamental. Marcus Thompson had already rewritten the facility's entire communication infrastructure the moment the first assault team breached the outer perimeter. What seemed like a simple research station was actually a complex technological trap, with communication systems that could adapt faster than the mercenaries could respond. The Viridian Neural-Link Squad found their collective consciousness suddenly fragmented. Their synchronized movement became a chaotic dance of confusion. Targeting systems began to lock onto their own team members. Weapon systems developed spontaneous malfunction protocols. Rakesh Vorn watched in horror as his carefully planned assault devolved into complete chaos. "Pull back," he screamed into his communication systems. But it was too late. The facility itself seemed to become a living weapon. Corridors shifted, gravity fluctuated. Environmental systems became weapons of psychological warfare. The mercenary teams found themselves fighting not just an enemy, but an entire technological ecosystem designed to defeat them. When the dust settled, not a single mercenary team had been killed, but they had been comprehensively defeated in a way that defied all standard combat protocols. Survivors would later describe it as fighting a living intelligence that anticipated every move before it was made. Some spoke of corridors that seemed to redirect their movement. Others described weapon systems that simply stopped working. Back on the mercenary consortium's primary communication network, the first reports began to filter in. Fragmented, confused, impossible to believe. "We were tactical ghosts," one Zorn unit leader reported, but they saw everything. Director Lyra Sovacs listened to the initial reports with a mixture of professional fascination and growing concern. This was more than a military team. This was something entirely different. The human special operations team hadn't just defended themselves. They had transformed the entire concept of defensive warfare. And this was only the beginning. In the research station, Commander Rice looked at Marcus Thompson with a slight smile. "Well," she said, "that should send a message." Thompson's fingers were already dancing across new communication systems, preparing for the next inevitable wave of attacks. "They'll be back," he responded, "and they'll be even more interesting next time." The mercenary communication networks blazed with activity in the weeks following the first disastrous engagement. What had begun as a simple contract had transformed into something far more complex, a puzzle that challenged everything known about military operations and technological warfare. On the communication hub of the Andromeda Mercenary Exchange, holographic displays churned with incoming reports. Fragments of mission logs, encrypted transmissions, and personal accounts created a mosaic of increasing complexity. Each new piece of information about the human team seemed to contradict everything that came before. Director Lyra Sovacs stood at the central hub, her translucent skin shifting through a spectrum of colors that reflected her intense concentration. She had built her reputation on predictive analysis, on understanding the mathematical principles that governed conflict. But this human team was something entirely different. "Run the analysis again," she instructed her primary data analyst, a multi-limbed computational specialist from the Nexus cluster. The holographic display reconstructed the mission engagement for the 100th time. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson's technological intervention was nothing short of miraculous. He hadn't just defended their position. He had fundamentally rewritten the rules of technological warfare. In a small briefing room on the outskirts of the Orion Mercenary headquarters, Lieutenant Commander Rakesh Forn reviewed the mission logs from his failed assault. His reputation had been built on decades of successful high-risk operations. Now, everything he understood about combat seemed inadequate. "They didn't just defend," he muttered to himself. "They predicted." The human team's background began to circulate through mercenary networks. Commander Jessica Rice wasn't just a military leader. Her previous work in diplomatic intelligence had been equally legendary. She had negotiated peace settlements in conflict zones that had defied resolution for generations. Her ability to understand complex social dynamics made her more than just a commander. She was a strategic force of nature. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson's background was equally extraordinary. A former lead engineer at a cutting-edge technology research firm, he had walked away from a multi-billion credit career to join special operations. His approach to combat was less about destruction and more about comprehensive system manipulation. The Zalaxian corporate alliance grew increasingly frustrated. Their initial contract had been designed to be simple, neutralize a problematic human team. But with each failed mercenary engagement, the complexity grew. Intercepted communication logs revealed something even more interesting. The human team wasn't just defending. They were actively destabilizing strategic networks that threatened global peace, economic manipulation, technological intervention, diplomatic maneuvering. On the planet Nexus Prime, a gathering of mercenary guild leaders convened an emergency session. The contract was becoming more than just a mission. It was becoming a professional challenge that threatened the entire mercenary ecosystem. "They've turned our own systems against us," growled Cronin of the Valyrian Mercenary Guild. Her exoskeleton clicked with agitation. "Every attempt to engage them becomes a lesson in our own inadequacies." The most recent mission logs were particularly disturbing. In one instance, the human team had managed to redirect an entire mercenary assault without firing a single weapon. They had used the attacking unit's own communication systems to create confusion, redirecting them to a location thousands of light years from their original target. It wasn't just technological superiority. It was a fundamental reimagining of conflict. Director Lyra Sovacs understood something the other mercenary leaders had not yet realized. This wasn't about eliminating a threat. This was about understanding a fundamentally different approach to strategic engagement. "They're not fighting a war," she said quietly to her closest advisors. "They're solving a complex problem that most of us can't even see." The bounty remained. The Zalaxian corporate alliance continued to push for the team's neutralization, but with each passing day, the mercenary networks were changing. What had begun as a simple contract was becoming something far more profound. A professional challenge that would redefine the understanding of conflict across the known galaxy. In a small research station at the edge of explored space, Commander Rice looked at Marcus Thompson and smiled. "They're starting to understand," she said. Thompson's fingers danced across a holographic interface. "Not yet," he responded, "but they're getting closer." The contract had become something of a legend within mercenary circles. Whispers spread through communication networks, telling of the human team that had transformed a simple neutralization mission into an existential challenge for the entire galactic mercenary ecosystem. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat in the secure briefing room of the Quantum Mercenary Guild, her holographic presentation cutting through the tension like a knife. She was the Guild's lead strategic analyst, a woman whose predictive models had been considered infallible. Until now. "We've analyzed over 200 potential engagement scenarios," she announced to the assembled guild leaders. Her hands moved across the holographic display, revealing complex mathematical models that seemed to twist and fold in on themselves. "In every single scenario, the human team introduces variables that our current strategic frameworks cannot predict." The guild leaders leaned forward. Some were veterans of 100 different conflicts. Others were young strategists who had built their entire careers on mathematical precision. But none of them could explain the human team's consistent ability to subvert every known tactical approach. "It's not just technological superiority," Rodriguez continued. "It's a fundamental difference in strategic thinking." She brought up a series of mission logs. Each one told a story of increasing complexity. In one instance, the human team had prevented a potentially devastating conflict by introducing a series of economic interventions that destabilized the political structure driving the conflict. In another, they had used a combination of diplomatic pressure and technological disruption to neutralize a threat before it could fully form. The Zalaxian corporate alliance's frustration was becoming palpable. Their initial contract had been straightforward: eliminate a problematic human special operations team. But with each failed attempt, the team seemed to become more influential, not less. Lieutenant Commander Rakesh Vorn had been tracking the team's movements personally. His reputation was at stake. The Kraken Collective didn't accept failure, and this mission was testing the limits of their professional pride. "They're not just defenders," Vorn muttered to his tactical team. "They're problem solvers." The latest intelligence suggested the human team was currently operating in the disputed territories of the Omega Quadrant, a region so complex that most mercenary groups avoided it entirely. Political boundaries shifted like sand. Economic interests intersected in ways that defied traditional understanding. Director Lyra Sovax received a private communication from an unexpected source, a diplomatic backchannel that suggested the human team's activities were far more nuanced than simple military intervention. "They're creating stability," she realized, "not through force, but through understanding." The mercenary networks began to fragment. Some groups saw the contract as a potential career-ending mission. Others viewed it as the ultimate professional challenge. But an increasing number were beginning to see the human team as something else entirely. Commander Jessica Reyes understood the game they were playing. It wasn't about winning a single conflict. It was about creating a framework for long-term stability. In a secured communication hub, Lieutenant Marcus Thompson was busy rewriting the fundamental algorithms that governed interstellar conflict resolution. His background in advanced systems engineering gave him a perspective that went beyond traditional military thinking. "We're not fighting a war," he explained to Reyes during a secured transmission. "We're solving a complex systemic problem." The Zalaxian corporate alliance began to apply increasing pressure. The bounty was raised. Economic sanctions were threatened against mercenary groups that refused the contract. But something fundamental had changed. The mercenary networks were no longer just a collection of hired guns. They were becoming a complex, interconnected system that was learning, adapting. And at the center of this transformation was a single human special operations team that seemed to understand something profound about conflict, technology, and human potential. "They're learning," Commander Rice said, watching the latest strategic models develop. Marcus Thompson's fingers danced across a holographic interface. "They're beginning to understand," he responded. "But we're just getting started." The contract remained. The mission continued. But the rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. The Omega Quadrant communication hub buzzed with an unprecedented level of activity. Mercenary groups from across the known galaxy were converging in a digital space that had never before seen such unified communication. What had begun as a simple contract was now a full-scale professional uprising. Director Lyra Sovak stood at the center of the emerging storm. Her translucent skin shifted through a complex pattern of colors that reflected the intricate political calculations happening in real time. The Zalaxian corporate alliance had crossed a line, and the mercenary networks were preparing to draw their own. "We will not proceed," announced Cronin of the Valyrian Mercenary Guild. Her exoskeleton clicked with a rhythm that suggested absolute determination. "The contract is no longer viable." The holographic displays showed a complex web of communication, mission logs, tactical analyses, personal testimonials from mercenary units that had attempted to engage the human team. Each report told a similar story of a team that was more than just a military unit. They were a systemic solution to complex galactic problems. Lieutenant Commander Rakesh Vorn had compiled the most comprehensive analysis. His presentation cut through the digital space like a precision instrument. "We are not facing a traditional threat," he explained. "We are facing a new paradigm of conflict resolution." The human team led by Commander Jessica Rice and Lieutenant Marcus Thompson had done something unprecedented. They had transformed a potential conflict into a complex problem-solving exercise that transcended traditional military engagement. Economic disruption logs showed how they had systematically destabilized conflict zones, not through violence, but through carefully calculated economic interventions. Diplomatic communication channels revealed a nuanced approach to international relations that made traditional negotiation techniques look primitive. The Zalaxian corporate alliance began to apply pressure. Economic sanctions were threatened. Communication channels were disrupted. But the mercenary networks had discovered something more valuable than any single contract: professional integrity. "They are solving problems we didn't even know existed," Dr. Elena Rodriguez argued during a pivotal meeting. Her holographic presentation showed a series of complex systems interactions that defied traditional understanding. "This is not about eliminating a threat. This is about understanding a fundamentally different approach to global stability." Marcus Thompson's technological interventions had become legendary. He didn't just defend against technological attacks. He reimagined the entire concept of technological warfare. Communication systems that were supposed to be secure became adaptive learning networks. Defensive protocols transformed into proactive problem-solving mechanisms. Commander Rice brought a diplomatic expertise that complemented Thompson's technological brilliance. She understood the human capacity for adaptation in a way that most galactic civilizations could not comprehend. The Zalaxian corporate alliance watched in growing frustration as their carefully constructed plan fell apart. The bounty remained, but the mercenary networks had transformed the entire concept of the contract. "We are refusing," Director Lyra Sovak announced in a communication that would be remembered for generations. Not out of fear, but out of professional respect. The mercenary networks began to publish their findings. Detailed reports that showed how the human team had prevented multiple potential conflicts. Economic interventions that had stabilized entire star systems. Diplomatic negotiations that had brought peace to regions that had known only war for generations. Something fundamental had changed in the galactic understanding of conflict. "They are not soldiers," Rakesh Vorn explained to his tactical team. "They are problem solvers." The communication networks lit up with a unified message. Mercenary groups from 100 different species, with cultures and technologies that could not be more different, had found a moment of absolute consensus. The contract was refused. In a small research station at the edge of explored space, Commander Rice looked at Marcus Thompson with a slight smile. "They're starting to understand," she said. Thompson's fingers danced across a holographic interface. "Not yet," he responded, "but they're getting closer." The mission continued, but the rules of engagement had been forever changed. The central chambers of the Zalaxian Corporate Alliance headquarters pulsed with a tension that bordered on molecular vibration. High-ranking executives gathered around a holographic display that showed the complete unraveling of their meticulously planned operation. Chief Executive Director Xantera slammed a crystalline appendage against the communication console. The sound reverberated through the chamber, a mix of frustration and disbelief. "Explain," she demanded of her chief strategic analyst. The analyst, a neural-linked computational specialist, projected a comprehensive breakdown of the mercenary network's collective refusal. It was more than a simple contract rejection. It was a fundamental realignment of professional ethics that threatened the entire existing power structure. "The human team has done something unprecedented," the analyst reported. "They've transformed the mercenary ecosystem from a collection of hired operatives into a unified professional network with a collective ethical standard." Xantera's translucent form shifted through a spectrum of colors that reflected her growing rage. The contract had been simple: eliminate a human special operations team that had become a significant disruption to corporate interests. Now that same team had turned the elimination attempt into a galactic diplomatic event. On the communication hub of the Andromeda Mercenary Exchange, Director Lyra Sovax was crafting a formal response to the Zalaxian Corporate Alliance's increasing pressure. Her species was known for near-perfect predictive analysis, but this situation defied all standard models. "We are not refusing based on difficulty," she dictated into the communication log. "We are refusing based on professional assessment of the team's strategic value to galactic stability." The diplomatic channels began to light up. What had started as a simple contract was becoming a complex international incident. Lieutenant Commander Rakesh Vorn found himself in an unprecedented position. He had been tasked with providing a comprehensive analysis of the human team's capabilities. His report was nothing short of revolutionary. Commander Jessica Rice and Lieutenant Marcus Thompson represent a new paradigm of strategic intervention. His report read, "They do not engage in conflict. They resolve systemic problems." The evidence was compelling. In the past 6 standard galactic months, the human team had prevented 3 potential interstellar conflicts, stabilized economic systems in 2 war-torn star systems, developed communication protocols that allowed previously hostile species to negotiate effectively, implemented technological solutions that reduced resource conflicts. The Zalaxian Corporate Alliance began to apply increasing pressure. Economic sanctions were threatened. Communication channels were disrupted. But the mercenary networks had discovered something more valuable than any single contract: professional integrity. Commander Reyes understood the game perfectly. This was never about a single mission. It was about demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to conflict resolution. In their secured communication hub, Lieutenant Marcus Thompson was busy developing new adaptive communication protocols. His background in advanced systems engineering gave him a perspective that went far beyond traditional military thinking. "We're creating a new framework," he explained to Reyes during a secured transmission. "One that views conflict as a complex system to be solved, not a problem to be eliminated through force." The human team's approach was revolutionary. They didn't just solve immediate problems. They created systems that could prevent future conflicts. Director Lyra Sovax prepared a comprehensive report that would be distributed across galactic communication networks. It wasn't just a rejection of the contract. It was a manifesto of a new approach to conflict resolution. The human team, her report concluded, represents a fundamental shift in our understanding of strategic intervention. The Zalaxian Corporate Alliance found themselves in an impossible position. Their attempt to eliminate a threat had transformed that very threat into a galactic diplomatic phenomenon. In a small research station at the edge of explored space, Commander Reyes looked at Marcus Thompson with a calculating smile. "They're learning," she said. Thompson's fingers danced across a holographic interface. "Not yet," he responded, "but they're getting closer." The mission continued, but the rules of engagement had been forever changed. The research station at the edge of the Crimson Nebula looked deceptively simple from the outside. A small, unassuming facility that could have been mistaken for any standard scientific outpost. But inside, Commander Jessica Reyes and Lieutenant Marcus Thompson were orchestrating a transformation that would reshape galactic politics. Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived through a secure quantum transportation channel, her holographic credentials flickering with multiple levels of authentication. She was the lead strategic analyst for the Quantum Mercenary Guild, but her role had evolved into something far more complex. "The communication protocols are ready," she announced, spreading a holographic display across the research station's central planning room. Layers of complex data danced between them. Economic projections, communication network analyses, conflict resolution models that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. Marcus Thompson looked up from his own interface, a slight smile playing across his lips. "Not just protocols," he corrected. "Adaptive communication ecosystems." The difference was crucial. Traditional communication protocols were static. These were living, breathing systems that could anticipate and resolve potential conflicts before they could fully form. The Zalaxian Corporate Alliance watched in growing frustration. Their attempts to neutralize the human team had transformed into something they could never have anticipated. What had begun as a simple elimination contract had become a fundamental challenge to their entire strategic approach. Chief Executive Director Xantera convened an emergency session of the corporate leadership. The holographic display showed the spreading influence of the human team, not through military force, but through systemic intervention. "They are solving problems we didn't know existed," one of the senior analysts reported. The communication networks showed a complex web of interventions: economic stabilizations, diplomatic resolutions, technological innovations that seemed to predict and prevent conflicts before they could fully form. Lieutenant Commander Rakesh Forn had become an unexpected advocate. His comprehensive analysis of the human team's capabilities had transformed from a military report to a manifesto of a new approach to conflict resolution. "They are not eliminating threats," his latest report read. "They are transforming the fundamental understanding of systemic conflict." The mercenary networks had become something more than a collection of hired operatives. They were now a unified professional ecosystem with a collective ethical standard. Director Lara Sovacs had orchestrated this transformation, turning what could have been a simple contract into a galactic diplomatic event. Commander Reyes understood the deeper game. This was never about a single mission or a specific threat. It was about demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to human potential. In the secured communication hub, Thompson continued to develop adaptive communication protocols that could predict and prevent potential conflicts. His background in advanced systems engineering gave him a perspective that went far beyond traditional military thinking. "We're creating a framework," he explained to Reyes, "that views conflict as a complex system to be understood and resolved, not a problem to be eliminated through force." The human team's approach was revolutionary. They didn't just solve immediate problems. They created systems that could prevent future conflicts by understanding the underlying complex interactions that led to those conflicts. Dr. Rodriguez's latest analysis showed the spreading impact. In 6 standard galactic months, the human team had prevented 4 potential interstellar conflicts, stabilized economic systems in 3 war-torn star systems, developed communication protocols that allowed previously hostile species to negotiate effectively, implemented technological solutions that reduced resource conflicts by 67%. The Zalaxian Corporate Alliance found themselves in an impossible position. Their attempt to eliminate a threat had transformed that very threat into a galactic diplomatic phenomenon. "They are rewriting the rules," Xantera muttered, watching the holographic displays that showed the spreading influence of the human team. In the research station, Commander Rice looked at Marcus Thompson with a calculating smile. "They're starting to understand," she said. Thompson's fingers danced across a holographic interface. "Not yet," he responded, "but they're getting closer." The mission continued, but the rules of engagement had been forever changed. The conference chamber at the Galactic Diplomatic Center seemed to hold its breath. Representatives from 100 different species sat in a semicircle, their various physiological configurations a testament to the diversity of known intelligent life. At the center of the room, Commander Jessica Reyes and Lieutenant Marcus Thompson stood as the unlikely architects of a new approach to interstellar relations. Chief Executive Director Xantera of the Zalaxian Corporate Alliance found herself in a position she had never anticipated. The contract that was supposed to eliminate a threat had instead created something far more profound. "We are here," Reyes began, her voice calm and measured, "to discuss a new framework for conflict resolution." Thompson's holographic display came to life, revealing a complex network of interconnected systems. It was less a presentation and more a living, breathing ecosystem of potential interactions, economic models, communication protocols, predictive conflict resolution algorithms that seemed to breathe with an intelligence of their own. Director Lyra Sovacs of the Mercenary Network watched with a mixture of professional admiration and strategic calculation. The human team had done something unprecedented. They had transformed a potential conflict into a comprehensive solution that benefited multiple stakeholders. Lieutenant Commander Rakesh Vorn stood as a living testament to the team's approach. Once tasked with eliminating them, he was now their most vocal advocate. His comprehensive analysis had become required reading across multiple galactic institutions. "They are not soldiers," Vorn had reported in his final assessment. "They are problem solvers." The evidence was overwhelming. In the standard galactic year since the initial contract was issued, the human team had prevented 7 potential interstellar conflicts, stabilized economic systems in 5 war-torn star systems, developed communication protocols that allowed previously hostile species to negotiate effectively, implemented technological solutions that reduced resource conflicts by 82%, created adaptive learning systems that could predict and prevent potential conflicts before they could fully form. Dr. Elena Rodriguez presented the mathematical models. They were beyond traditional strategic analysis. These were living, adaptive ecosystems of conflict prevention that challenged everything known about interstellar relations. "We are not proposing a solution," Thompson explained. "We are proposing a method of understanding." The diplomatic representatives leaned forward, some with biological eyes, some with sensor arrays, some with sensory appendages that defied human comprehension. But all were listening. Reyes outlined their approach. It wasn't about eliminating threats. It was about understanding the complex systems that created those threats. Economic inequalities, communication barriers, resource distribution challenges. Each problem was a complex ecosystem to be understood, not a military target to be destroyed. The Zalaxian Corporate Alliance found themselves in an impossible position. Their attempt to eliminate a threat had transformed that very threat into a galactic diplomatic phenomenon. Xantera's final report to her corporate board was brutally honest. "We sought to remove a problem," the report read. "Instead, we have discovered a new approach to galactic cooperation." The mercenary networks had become something more than a collection of hired operatives. They were now a unified professional ecosystem with a collective ethical standard. Director Lyra Sovacs had orchestrated this transformation, turning what could have been a simple contract into a galactic diplomatic event. In the conference chamber, the representatives from 100 different species began to see a possibility they had never considered. A framework for understanding that went beyond traditional conflict resolution. "We are not proposing peace," Rice said quietly. "We are proposing understanding." Thompson's final presentation showed a living, breathing model of potential interactions. It was less a strategic plan and more a philosophical approach to existence. Complex, adaptive, alive. The room fell silent. Outside the conference chamber, the universe continued its endless dance of complexity and potential, but something fundamental had changed. The mission was complete, but the real work was just beginning.